Hi, Zizaran here with another Last Epoch guide for the upcoming launch, and this is a guide with McFluffin, one of the best Last Epoch creators, and that's what we're going to be doing a lot of. I'll be working with the best and brightest Last Epoch creators to show you some really cool stuff. This build, for those of you who are known for Path of Exile or Diablo, is spin to win. So this is similar to Cyclone or Whirlwind, and it is an absolutely beautiful build. So you'll be slashing your enemies down, and you'll have friends this time. It does leave behind an echo or sort of a shadow that will keep spinning. And a really good thing about this build, it is simple, accessible, and it is a 2-button build, and that means that if you are somebody that is missing a limb or you have limited buttons that you're able to click, etc., this is really good for that. So check this out. Can you tell me a little bit, like, how does this build play? And yeah, just walk us through the build.
Yeah, absolutely, Ziz. So this build is going to, like you said, use 2 buttons. At the beginning, we do a little bit of a buff and get our mana back, but that even isn't necessary. It's a nice little extra, but not at all required. Once we get going, the really only thing we want to do is we want to keep spinning and keep moving at least 4 meters every 2 seconds. So we circle around enemies like this, and then to do extra damage, we just use our anomaly on cooldown. And as you can see, it has no problem shredding through this enemy. So it's really easy to play. It's really easy to stay out of the enemy's attacks. And it's also, in my opinion, really visually pleasing to see all of these little echoes doing these purple spins all over the place. So we'll make quick work of this shade here, no problem. And literally all I did was hold down, right click, try to avoid stuff when I could, and use anomaly on cooldown, and he's dead.
And for those of you that don't know what this boss is, it's basically a RNG boss where it has a pool of multiple items that it can choose from, of multiple skills. So every time you fight the boss, it's going to be slightly different. It'll have some moves different than before. You don't know exactly what you're walking into.
As far as downsides go, so the build is not very tanky. It doesn't need to be because it's moving around so much, but if you do get hit, it's gonna hurt. It's also not a very involved playstyle. There's not a whole lot of buttons to press. You really only use 2 buttons most of the time, and you hold down 1. If you want to unlock crit, which is going to be a really big part of the build, it requires a legendary if you want to not have any downsides, any other downsides in the build. And finally, to get maximum efficiency out of the build, you need to manage Sigils of Hope, which a lot of people don't really enjoy doing. It's not as bad as a lot of builds. You do it basically at the beginning of the map, but it's still something that a lot of people don't enjoy.
And if you're not familiar with Last Epoch as well, I do have a lot of beginner guides and how to play Last Epoch and how to get into it on my channel. And if you're interested, a great way to support the channel is that you can buy Last Epoch through my Nexus link, which is in the description down below, and I get a kickback. So here we have the Maxroll article by McFluffin, and if you're not familiar with Maxroll, this is basically just a really good version of it. Well, if you're a PoE player, similar to Path of Building, where it'll walk you through everything step by step, and there is a leveling portion of the guide by Tarek, and we'll look through that in a sec. But really great guide here, and they always focus on pros and cons and stuff. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I do want to show off the Maxroll article here. It's very nice and step by step, so make sure you check that out. It's very easy to follow. And then here, the same thing is true for the passive tree, where you can see that you can like click through it. So similar to how we do our PoE guides, very, very easy with a step-by-step. And same with the items, where you have multiple sections of the gear. So early on, you can see that you start out with like barely anything unique that are hard to get. And later on, it'll show you what are the in-game things you really need to make the build super beefy.
When we're talking about gear, there's a couple of things this build really wants. It does perfectly fine without gear, but it loves to get it. It really enjoys getting dark strides. This gives you increased movement per added melee void damage. To go along with that, an Apathy's Maw is huge. If you get melee crit on it as a legendary, it's a tremendous boost to your speed and your damage, along with Dark Stride with Mercurial. Huge, huge bonus. We also want Siphon of Anguish, and we want Shattered Chains. Siphon gives a bunch of different stats, including more damage from Doom, but also that leeches tremendous move speed and elemental resistance. Everything we get on this is great, and it's easy to get LP on it. And then Shattered Chains gives us armor, it gives us additional melee damage, and another damage multiplier. Finally, we really want Wings of Argentus, that 20% less damage taken while moving, along with that haste, really turbocharges the build and gives it some damage reduction, which it struggles to find in other areas. For stat priorities, we want a lot of health. We want a lot of melee void damage. That's going to give us that movement speed along with, of course, its own damage. Once we get an Apathy's Maw with melee crit, we're going to definitely be pushing critical strike chance. Strength is a great stat because it's going to give us both increased damage and it's going to give us armor. Outside of that, the big thing to note to get all resistance while channeling is huge for the build. 36% all res while channeling is the highest all res you can get in the game, and you are always channeling with this build, so you're going to want to try to find a tier 6 or tier 7 of that as soon as you can.
As for leveling this build, we know you're going to love to spin to win as soon as possible and do the whole campaign that way. McFluffin will now show you how you can do just that.
As far as leveling goes, so we don't currently have a Warpath leveling guide on Maxroll. We will, but at the moment, there isn't one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how I would level it, because it's very possible to level with Warpath. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go down and take Reckless Spin. This is going to cause the mana cost to go to 0, so you can spin constantly. The downside is that you will have a lot of elemental resistance lost. You'll be in the negative, which means you'll take more damage from it. It's not the end of the world, and there's a pair of gloves fairly early on from a quest you can get to mitigate at least some of that. For most players, this is going to be worth it, so I would highly recommend they do that. You're also going to want probably 1 or 2 points in Quicksilver Wind, so you're not going too slow. And then you're going to really want to go push this upper right-hand side, get Echo Knight, Apocalypse Whirl, and then Mob the Deep 3 points. That's going to be a huge part of your damage. You'll finally go over and take Whirling Steel at the end. As far as the passive tree, you are going to be focusing mostly on getting up to here, to Avatar of Regret. How you're going to do that, you're going to go through and take World Eater. Before you get this, you're going to want Health on Hit on your weapon. Get it as early as you can. Put it in your loot filter as red, going to be really important. Then it's all about getting Echo Chance from Echoing Strikes, Time Legion, and Avatar of Regret. If you do that, you will have a good time leveling the build.
That marks the end of the Warpath build collab with McFluffin. Make sure you follow him on his Twitch, which you can see on the screen. He's going to be live pretty much all the time when Last Epoch launches on February 21st. So you can ask him all the questions you have about this build. As I mentioned earlier, you can support me by purchasing Last Epoch at the Nexus store linked below. Try to die less than I do.